In our town, from the very moment a child was born, the first thing handed to them wasn't a blanket or a name, it was a charm. Each charm was different, chosen by the town's oldest woman, who everyone called Mother Dell. She would take one long look at the newborn, squint those pale, cloudy eyes of hers, and decide which curse the child would be most vulnerable to. That would determine the type of charm they'd wear around their neck for the rest of their life. Mine was a small piece of bone wrapped in copper wire. I hated it. I thought it was ugly and creepy. I didn't understand why I had to wear it all the time. But my mother made sure it never left my neck. Not even during baths I grew up watching. Every kid around me wears something odd, bits of black cloth, glass beads filled with ash, tiny silver bells, nails, feathers, even teeth. Some wore theirs proudly, like badges of honor. Others, like me, hated the stares we got from outsiders. But to the people in town, they weren't accessories. They were lifelines. Without them, we were naked to the forces that haunted our streets, our homes, our names. Birthdays weren't celebrated like in other places. There were no candles, no games, no presents. Instead, on your birthday, you visited the mirror room. It was a windowless stone chamber inside the town hall, lined with old, uneven mirrors that reflected strange versions of yourself. You'd be brought there with your family, and while everyone stood in a circle holding hands, Mother Dell, or whoever held the title at the time, would light a small fire and watch your reflection. She claimed the fire revealed whether a new curse had awakened in you. If it had, she'd assign another charm, usually something worse than the first. I remember my 7th birthday clearly. I was already nervous walking into that room, even though I didn't believe any of it was real. But the moment the fire was lit, something shifted in my reflection. I looked the same, but my mouth didn't move when I talked. My hands twitched. In the mirror, when mine was still, my parents started whispering prayers immediately. I was given a second charm ring made of thread and dried rosemary, which had to be sewn into all my clothes. I never saw it do anything, but I didn't dare remove it. We were taught from a young age that curses weren't random, they were like seeds. They lived in our blood, our bones, our names. If you weren't careful, you'd water them with the wrong action, the wrong word, or even the wrong emotion. That's why people were careful not to show too much anger, or grief, or jealousy. All of those things, they said, could stir a curse awake. Laughter was quiet. Mourning was private. Even love had limits. People feared getting too attached, because if a curse targeted one person, it could bleed into those closest to them. The town's belief in curses wasn't just about tradition. There were stories too many to ignore. Stories about people who forgot their charms and were found the next day with their mouths sewn shut. Or people who stepped into their homes at the wrong time of night and were never seen again. Some claimed they heard crying coming from the wells. Others swore that certain trees whispered names at dusk. Once, a boy in my class took off his charm. On a dare, he started coughing that night, and within a week, he stopped speaking altogether. Doctors said it was psychological trauma. The town said it was the silent curse. They buried his voice in a wooden box behind the school. No one left town either. That was the most important rule. Outsiders could visit, but no one born here was allowed to leave for good. It was believed that if someone left without the blessing of the elders, their curse would awaken fully and follow them, haunting not just them, but wherever they went. My aunt tried it once. She moved to the city for college. Within 3 months, she was back, pale and shaking, blind in one eye, muttering about a shadow that waited for her in every room. No one asked what happened. Her charm was buried in her chest after that, sewn under her skin. Growing up like this changed you. You learned to scan every corner of every room. You learned to never speak someone's name more than twice in a row. You never slept with your windows open. And above all, you never took your charm off, no matter how much it burned, itched, or disgusted you. I spent most of my childhood torn between fear and disbelief. Sometimes I thought the adults were just superstitious. Other times, like when I heard scratching under my bed that stopped the second I grabbed my charm, I wasn't so sure. Whether or not the curses were real didn't matter. What mattered was that everyone believed they were. And that belief shaped every moment of our lives. We had a place in town that no one liked to talk about. It didn't have a name, at least not one anyone ever used out loud. But everyone knew where it was. On the east side, near the edge of the woods, stood an old stone cottage wrapped in thorny vines. It looked abandoned, decaying, the windows blackened with grime, the chimney collapsed. But we knew better. That was where they took people when the curse became too strong, when charms didn't work anymore, when someone began to change. Wasn't always sudden. Sometimes it started with dreams. People said they'd see things in their sleep, a pale woman standing at their window, a mouth in the ceiling whispering backwards, a hand reaching out from under the floor. Then the signs would show. They'd stop eating. They'd forget names, even their own. Some would start bleeding from strange places: eyelids, fingernails, the soles of their feet. Others began speaking in voices that weren't theirs. That's when the elders made the decision. You didn't get to argue. If the council decided your curse had reached the turning, you were sent to the stone cottage. They said it was the only way to protect the rest of us, that the cottage had been built with old symbols carved deep into the foundation, binding the curse to its bearer and trapping it there. No one knew exactly what happened inside. No one who went in ever came out. As kids, we dared each other to get close to it. Once, when I was 12, my friend Ellie and I crept up to the edge of the thorn line. We wanted to see if we could hear anything inside. We didn't get very far. Just as we stepped on the overgrown path, every bird around us stopped singing. The air shifted, like it got heavier. I swear I heard someone humming a woman's voice, low and off-key. We ran and never spoke about it again. That night, I found one of the thorns in my shoe, but it was wet, like it had been dipped in something warm and alive. Sometimes people just disappeared. They didn't get sick, didn't show any signs, but one day they were gone, and everyone pretended they'd moved away or gone on a trip. But there were no goodbyes. Their houses were always cleaned out by morning, all their things gone, as if they'd never existed. Those were the ones people were most afraid of. The quiet cursed. They were called the ones who didn't show symptoms, but had something festering inside them, waiting to bloom. The town didn't take chances. It was better to vanish a person than to risk the whole town's suffering. I remember one night when the bells rang. That was the signal. 3 long chimes from the church bell, all in a row, meant someone was being taken. We weren't allowed to look. Doors were locked, curtains shut. We had to cover our mirrors, hold our charms tight, and wait in silence. But that night, I peeked. I know I wasn't supposed to, but curiosity got the better of me. Through the gap in the curtain, I saw 2 figures in dark robes leading someone down the main road. The person didn't struggle. They walked slowly, calmly, but their shadow on the ground twisted in a way that didn't match their steps. It moved like it was dancing. The next day, No one spoke of it. No one ever did. But I noticed the neighbors had painted symbols on their doors again, ones that hadn't been used in years. I asked my father what they meant. He told me not to speak of that night again. He didn't say it with anger. He said it with fear. People outside would never understand. To them, it would seem barbaric, cruel. But to us, it was survival. The curses weren't just stories. We lived with them. They shaped our roads, our rules, our silence. We didn't have a hospital in town. No need. Illness wasn't treated with medicine. It was treated with ritual. We had no police. Justice wasn't about crime. It was about omen and consequence. Every family had a story of someone who was taken. My grandmother had a sister who vanished at 18. They said she had started speaking in Latin in her sleep, even though she'd never studied it. My uncle used to hum strange songs and write in spirals on the walls. He was gone before I was born. My mother cried once while folding laundry, a red sock clutched tight in her hands. I later learned it belonged to a boy she used to love, taken. When they were teenagers, the cottage never aged. Everything else around it fell. 2 time trees grew, houses collapsed, roads cracked, but the cottage stood the same. Some said it fed off the curses, growing stronger with each soul it held. Others believed it was alive, breathing, dreaming. There were rumors that if you pressed your ear to the walls, you could hear the people inside, still whispering, still waiting. I never got close enough to test it. I never wanted to, but I never forgot that it was there, watching from the edge of the woods, waiting for the next name to be called. And I always wondered, what if someone didn't go willingly? What if the curse refused to be locked away? What would happen then? Would the walls hold? Would the silence break? Some things are never meant to be questioned. I remember the first time I actually saw someone curse another person. I was 9 years old, sitting at the back of the town's annual harvest gathering. Everyone was wearing charms, dried herbs tied to their wrists, salt circling the fire pit, and whispering old blessings under their breath as they passed the bread. That night, something happened that no one expected, at least not out in the open. A woman named Alma stood up suddenly. She wasn't someone people liked to talk to. She kept to herself, lived with a dozen cats, and had eyes like glass cold and distant. She had always made people uneasy, but no one dared confront her. Until that night, there was a boy, David. He was 16 and loud. He'd been teasing Alma earlier in the week, calling her a dead witch walking, throwing rocks at her house with his friends. That night, as the drums played and people danced, Alma walked up to David without a word. Everyone stopped. The air grew thick. She leaned in, looked him right in the eyes, and said something I didn't understand. The language was old, broken, like leaves rustling underwater. Then she spit into the fire, turned around, and walked back to her seat. David laughed it off. He told everyone she was just putting on a show. But the next day, his voice was gone. Not just hoarse gone. He couldn't even whisper. Then his skin turned pale, then grey. He started scratching at his arms, saying he could feel insects crawling under his skin. His parents took him to the city doctor, but nothing worked. A week later, they moved away. No one heard from them again. That was the first curse I witnessed, and it changed how I looked at everyone after that. I began noticing things I hadn't before. Arguments in the street would end with one person muttering and tossing salt at the other's feet. A child who stole from the market had to be bathed in goat's milk while 7 women chanted around him. People left bread at the base of certain trees, and no one would touch birds that died on Tuesdays. Every action had weight. Every word could be dangerous. The wrong phrase spoken at the wrong time could unravel someone's whole life. One evening, I saw my own mother tying black string around our front door. She was whispering something, her voice tight and urgent. I asked her what she was doing. She didn't turn to look at me, just said, "Someone said something they shouldn't have." When I asked who, she finally turned. Her eyes were wet. "Me," she said. I never asked about it again. There were people in town who specialized in curses, both giving and breaking them. They weren't called witches. That was too simple. They were called knowers. They knew things about the world that most of us didn't. About names, shadows, bloodlines. You didn't go to them unless you had to. Some of them only accepted payment in secrets, and once you told them something, it was theirs forever. One old man, Mr. Givens, had lived on the same porch for over 60 years. He never walked, but people said he'd cursed every dog that had ever bitten a child. Dogs just stopped breathing in their sleep. Curses weren't like stories or fairy tales. They didn't come with big lightning bolts or glowing eyes. Most of the time, they were slow, creeping things. A cracked mirror that wouldn't stay fixed. A smell in your room no one else could detect. A dream that played over and over again, until you woke up whispering names you didn't know. Some families had a long history of carrying curses. They'd passed them down like heirlooms, trying to keep them asleep, like a snake coiled in a box. But every so often, it would stir. There was one girl in school, Kara, whose family had been cursed 4 generations ago. No one would sit next to her. Not because she was cruel or strange. She was quiet, polite, but her family's curse made. Flowers die in her hands. Teachers used to ask her to bring homework instead of plants on school presentation days. I once saw her pick a daisy from the field, and it crumbled into dust between her fingers. Everyone whispered that the curse would get stronger when she turned 17. She disappeared 3 days before her birthday. No one went looking. That's how things were in our town. The fear of curses shaped how we lived, who we loved, who we trusted. There were rules about what could be said during storms, who could speak during funerals, and where to bury your fingernail clippings. Even our holidays were structured around protection. On the last day of summer, everyone painted symbols on their doors and left food at crossroads. We didn't celebrate for joy, we celebrated to survive. Once, I asked an elder if curses were real because of the land or because of us. She said, "We are the land." I didn't understand it then, but now I think she meant that the curse wasn't some outside force that came to us. It grew with us, shaped by us, passed through us like a memory too bitter to forget. You couldn't run from it. Not truly. You could try to protect yourself, carry your charms, watch your words, avoid cursed families. But the fear was always there, waiting under your skin like a splinter you couldn't quite pull out. Even now, when I walk into a new place, I check the corners for salt. I still don't speak certain names out loud. And sometimes, late at night, I find myself whispering apologies to people I haven't wronged just in case. I started noticing that some people in our town weren't just afraid of curses, they relied on them. They believed curses were tools, not just punishments. There was an unspoken layer of control woven into everything, and the people who mastered that balance were both feared and respected. These were the individuals who knew how to curse without saying a word, who knew how to inflict misfortune with just a look or a gesture. They operated in silence, their power hidden beneath polite smiles and old rituals. It was never about rage or vengeance. It was about subtle dominance. If you crossed them, something in your life would unravel, and you'd never be able to trace it back. There was a woman named Lydia who lived 2 streets over from us. She was a seamstress, sweet, quiet, always generous with her time and tea. But everyone in town knew she had never once been cheated in business, and anyone who dared try was quickly met with misfortune. A man once shorted her on a payment for a wedding gown, and a week later, his barn burned down in a freak lightning strike. He swore he saw something in the smoke, something watching him. People whispered Lydia had stitched something into the gown thread soaked in black water. A whisper sewn into the lining dot. It wasn't just Lydia. The butcher's wife was said to have salted her doorstep, not just for protection, but to bind her husband to her, to keep his affections from wandering. The salt was mixed with hair and nail clippings, and people said if he ever crossed her, his tongue would rot before he could speak another woman's name. He never looked another woman in the eye again, and he always walked 3 steps behind her. Children were taught the rules early. They were told not to make fun of others, not to step on certain cracks in the church path, and never to point at anyone during a new moon. These weren't just old-fashioned rules. They were precautions. Even the school teachers knew better than to punish a student too harshly without first checking who their family was. Some last names carried long histories, and retaliation didn't always come from a parent. Sometimes it came in dreams, in illness, in sudden bad luck that wouldn't let go. One of the most chilling stories I remember involved a man named Arthur, the town's only mechanic. He was known to be arrogant, a bit cruel. He laughed at the old traditions, called them peasant talk. He refused to follow the town's customs, refused to close his shop during the eclipse or sprinkle ash water on his tools like everyone else did. One day he got into an argument with a young girl. No one knows why. She left his shop crying. That night, something changed. His hands started cramping. The bones bent inward. Within a week, he couldn't hold a wrench. Within a month, he couldn't hold a spoon. He stopped coming out of his house altogether. No one went to visit. People didn't talk about curses as threats. No one said, "I'll curse you." That would have been too blunt, too dangerous. Instead, they'd say things like, "You'll find what you deserve," or "Be careful what paths you walk." They would send you home with odd gifts, half a lemon, a feather, a broken watch, and you'd spend days trying to decode whether it meant harm or healing. The fear wasn't just in the curses themselves, but in the possibility of being cursed and never knowing for sure. The silence around it was what made it powerful. I remember being warned once, when I got into an argument with a boy at school. My grandmother pulled me aside and told me not to speak ill of his mother. "She knows the old tongue," she said. She buried her brother with a sealed mouth. I didn't know what that meant, but I kept quiet. Everyone did. There were dozens of stories like that, half-spoken, filled with symbols, wrapped in warnings. It wasn't just superstition, it was survival. As I grew older, I realized there were entire families whose power rested on their ability to make people believe they were capable of cursing. It didn't matter whether they truly could. Belief was enough. If people feared you, you didn't need to actually curse anyone. The suggestion alone made others stay away, respect you, give you space. Some even embraced that role, dressing in darker clothes, speaking in riddles, cultivating the image. They never had to lift a finger to be powerful. It was performance, but it worked. At the same time, there were those who used curses to protect others. I once watched an old man place a carved stone at the entrance to the town well. He didn't say why, but after that day, no one ever got sick from the water again. When someone asked him what the stone meant, he simply said, "I reminded the spirits who this town belongs to." Whether he believed it or not didn't matter, everyone else did. And the sickness stopped. It became clear to me that curses weren't just born from hate or revenge. They were woven into the way we structured our community. They kept people in line, made them think twice before acting out of cruelty or greed. In a way, curses were our form of justice, our way of maintaining order when laws couldn't reach the heart of things. They were tools of consequence in a place where everyone believed that energy had weight, and every wrong action would eventually echo back. You didn't have to understand how it worked. You just had to believe it could. And in our town, everyone did. The day I decided to challenge the town's beliefs, everything changed. It wasn't a big act of rebellion. I didn't set fire to an altar or speak ill of the elders. It was small, barely noticeable. I tossed out a charm my grandmother had given me, a piece of knotted red thread with a dried clove and a tiny white bead. She had tied it onto my wrist when I turned 16, whispering that it would guard me from ill intentions and bad dreams. I'd worn it for years, mostly out of habit. But one morning, I looked at it and felt tired of living under shadows, of walking on eggshells, of waiting for a curse to fall out of the sky. I untied it and threw it into the river that night. I dreamed of hands, dozens of them reaching for me through a fog that smelled like rotting flowers. I woke up sweating, my room cold despite the heat. My phone was dead, even though it had been fully charged. The power was out across the whole block, but only in my house had the mirrors fogged up from the inside. It could have been a coincidence, I told myself. A bad dream and a blackout. But deep down, I knew what the town would say. I had broken a protection, disrespected the balance. Over the next few days, little things started happening. My keys vanished, then reappeared in the refrigerator. I heard tapping at the window at night. Always 3 taps, never more, never less. A cat I'd never seen before started sitting on my porch, staring at the door without blinking. Then came the whispers, barely audible, like someone speaking just outside the range of hearing. I couldn't tell if they were real or if my mind had become hyper-aware, looking for signs because that's how I'd been raised. I tried to laugh it off. I told my friends it was just my imagination. But they looked at me strangely. They stopped inviting me to things. One of them, Donnie, pulled me aside and whispered, "You need to fix it. Go to Miriam." Miriam was a woman who lived on the edge of town, alone, in a house wrapped in ivy and bells. She was one of the old ones, the kind of person people went to quietly when they were desperate. I didn't want to go to her. That would mean admitting that I believed again. But the next night, I found a dead crow on my doorstep, its wings pinned open with thorns. My stomach twisted. That wasn't random. That wasn't normal. So I went to Miriam's. Her house smelled like herbs and smoke. She didn't ask why I was there. She just looked at me and said, "Something saw you when you let go." I asked her if it was a curse. She shook her head. "Not a curse, a gap. You created a space by rejecting the old ways, and something slipped through." I told her I didn't believe in curses. She only smiled, sadly. "It doesn't matter what you believe. It matters what believes in you." Miriam gave me a bundle of leaves wrapped in black cloth and a jar of something thick and dark. She told me to smear it on the thresholds of my home and burn the leaves at dusk, repeating the phrase she wrote on the back of a torn playing card. "It's not a cure," she said. "It's a closing." I did what she said. The smell of the leaves made me dizzy. The phrase she gave me made the air feel heavier when I spoke it. That night, I dreamed of the river and something beneath. The surface, retreating. When I woke up, the cat was gone. The keys stayed where I left them. The whispers stopped, but something in me had shifted. I realized then that the town's beliefs weren't just about fear. They were about structure. Rituals and protections gave people a sense of control in a world that didn't offer much. I had broken the rules, not out of courage, but out of frustration, and when I did, I had drawn attention to myself, not from people, but from whatever it was that lurked between the cracks of the town's reality. I began to understand why people clung so tightly to the traditions. Why they salted their steps, burned sage on Fridays, left milk at crossroads. It wasn't superstition to them, it was armor. It was their way of saying, "We see the darkness, and we will not be consumed by it." Now I keep another charm tied to my wrist. It's not the same one my grandmother gave me. This one I made myself following Miriam's instructions, soaking the thread in moon water, binding it at dawn. It's not about fear, it's about respect, about balance. I still question things. I still wonder how much of it is real and how much is belief feeding itself. But I no longer mock the rules. I no longer assume safety without effort. Because in our town, ignoring the curse is sometimes worse than believing in it and challenging. The unseen comes with a cost, one I won't risk again.